Welcome to another episode of the Face Ripper Records Tear Your Fucking Face Off podcast. I'm here with Keith, the founder and lead kind of project composer of a musical project called Nightfall. There's an album coming out called Destiny Calling. Keith has had quite an extensive background in music, but then also a period of absence, and he's back with a bang. And you'll have seen, hopefully, and if not, links below, you'll have seen my reaction to Raise the Fist and Starfall, just two of the tracks that feature, and it's epic, awesome, kind of fantasy, symphonic beauty. It's glorious in its nature. And in the short time I've known Keith, he's a warm, humble, fantastic, and interesting human being. And we're going to kind of expose that here today. So, firstly, Keith, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Like you said, it's been an interesting journey so far. And thank you for letting me come on to the podcast and share my story and everything. And I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well as well.
Oh yes, yeah, very well, very busy. You're always busy. There's always stuff happening here. I've got lots of things on the boil, but this episode's not about me. It's about you and your journey. So, I guess what is typical in podcasts. Where did it all start? Let's talk about how you kind of entered musicality.
Okay, so that goes far back. My mother wanted me to play a musical instrument, so she enrolled me to play the violin. Was my first one. I was 7 years old, and had no idea what I was doing. I didn't understand theory or anything like that. So my teacher quickly learned that teaching me theory was not going to help. So she found out that I could mimic things and I could hear everything by ear. So she would just show me how to play something, and then I would pretty much have it down within about 5 minutes.
Mhm.
So that's how she started teaching me how to play. And I did the Suzuki method. I was on that for 3 years. And then I decided that violin was just not the instrument I wanted to play. I loved it, but it's not the one I wanted to play. So, and it was taking too much of my time. So I wanted to go be a normal kid and play baseball and all that kind of stuff. So I took a step back from music, but then a few years later, I started teaching myself how to play piano. And that was the instrument that I kept doing this entire time, and practice, practice, practice. So I've never had formal training in composing. I don't know theory, any of those things. All of it is what I hear in my head, and I compose by ear.
Okay, that's really interesting and pretty cool because I did a similar journey, minus the violin. I kind of led myself into church. My family were not religious, but far from it. But I kind of saw it as a sanctuary for a period of time, and I think I was probably maybe about 9 or something like this. And I started just sort of tapping around on a piano, and a piano in kind of well, she was an instructor, kind of noticed I had the right touch, the right kind of sound, and I was doing things in key without kind of really knowing it. So she sort of nudged me to kind of do that more, and then that became a sort of an obsessive kind of self-taught direction, and I would later go on to pick up guitar again, all self-taught, all mimicking. Hear something, find a root note or third or something, and then from then I was off. I've got it.
Yep.
And I've learned some theory along the way, as you kind of do, but I wouldn't. Don't ask me for all the Italian names, and don't ask me to replicate it. But yeah, so I understand you as a composer, and I think that this is something that I kind of heard, if it's possible. I can't describe how one hears that style of approach to someone's composition, but it's just, maybe it's just something innate within us composers. I mean, you've heard some of my stuff, I've heard your stuff. I don't know if you kind of sense what I'm talking about there.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Because I don't know. Sometimes you just hear it, and then if you've got the skills and you understand how to use the technology, you can actually take what's in here and translate it, into an auditory symphony. And that's kind of what I started doing. Like when I was younger, I didn't have all those tools, right? So I didn't know how to take what was in my head and put it out the way I heard it, right? But now with all the VSTs, with everything that's available to us, I'm able to play everything on the piano and then tweak it to sound the way that I hear it in my head, which is why the Nightfall stuff sounds the way that it does and why it's so unique and it's not that conventional orchestration either, is because I hear it differently.
Before you kind of Nightfall, what were you doing? There was a band before.
Yep. So there was a band called Events Ethos, and they are now called Anaria. So they have I was in like the early iteration of the band way back in the mid to late 2000s. And that's where Jessica Mercy and I, who is one of the guest vocalists on this album in multiple tracks, originally met. And when I took my step back from music, she renamed the band and started redoing things. And now they have this new iteration that has moved. They still have symphonic elements, but they've moved more to like a gothic, like Within Temptation meets Hymn style of music that they do now. And with her husband Sergio and one of the longtime members Dan Spinney and stuff like that. So they've kind of created this new platform with the band, but still honor the old traditions. If you go to Anaria's, socials and stuff like that, and you go listen to them on Spotify, they have an album from 2014 called Ancestors. All of the demos from 2009 that I took part in, that I co-wrote with Jessica and Todd Miller, are all there.
Right. Okay. So I will leave a link to Anaria somewhere in the descriptions below, just to kind of the history. And it's always cool to introduce people to music, and especially where you came from. So that was 2009. You were writing the demos there for that 2014 release. Well, has not lost on me that it's 2024 now.
Yep.
That's quite a sizable difference. So, and you mentioned you took a step back.
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in the kind of where it can sometimes get to like a love-hate with our own innate musicianship and the frustrations of the world, the expectations that we perhaps falsely or fraudulently have when we commence our path to the idea of making it. What happens when life gets in the way? So and then why do we return, and why should we return, which is a big ethic about which touches everything that I do. So tell me about that.
Okay. So shortly after, I kind of left Events Ethos towards 2010. Because one of the things that was happening is I had started dating somebody and they were cross country, so I was going to move, and I did, and it did not work out. I ended up coming back because my parents moved back home, and my mother asked me to because my dad was not doing well at the time. He ended up doing okay for a good long while after that, but I moved back initially for that reason, and I started to potentially go back to music at that point. But then I met my wife, and we got pregnant very quickly into our relationship. And she was like, I really don't want you doing this right now, because you need to be focused on having a big boy job and making sure that you have, the family protected and financially sound. So I made a promise to her that I would quit, and I quit music.
On that point, I mean, that I understand that kind of approach. Without kind of being too gender hardline. I mean, it's kind of well known that women value the stability in a relationship. We all do, but I think that's a more feminine attribute, because men are providers. If you want to look at the old-fashioned sort of classical sense, that I think that's something that's inbuilt in all of us. And whilst it might not be popular in the modern era to say that, I still think there's a large core of that inside each one of us men, and therefore it stands to reason there is in each individual woman. But hearing that, and obviously you have the commitment to your relationship and to love and to kind of your own future and building your own family, but then you also have this musician inside of you that you are being forced to, well, not forced, but you're being compelled and asked to essentially eradicate. How did that feel at the time, and how did you go about it, and what were the struggles that you kind of encountered on that departure?
So the departure was tough because it's what I loved, and I still I mean, I gave people advice. I helped my friends that were still in music. I still listened to music. I still gave, pointers if I heard a mix and stuff like that. So I would still kind of like do little, I guess, producer-esque things in the background when I was asked to. And that's kind of, I taught myself guitar. So I didn't stop playing altogether. I had a random guitar given to me by a friend, and I just started plucking around with that and playing a little bit here and there when I had a minute or two.
So it
You
wasn't
know,
essentially the musicianship she was asking you to relinquish. Was it? It was like the forming of projects and making it all consuming.
but we needed money. We were moving and stuff. My keyboard was a good, sale, so I sold it for money too, because the resale value on those keyboards are still pretty good. So I had a cheap, $100 flying V that I found at a pawn shop and stuff like that, and that was the only musical instrument I had for a while. And I didn't touch music for a bit after that, because we moved around a lot. We ended up in Massachusetts and then Tennessee and then Kentucky. I ended up in Georgia for 14 months, traveling from Georgia to Tennessee for my job. There just wasn't a lot of time for many years. And then 2017 happened, and my mother passed away from Alzheimer's.
That
And
exceedingly, but it's exceedingly tough under any circumstances. Um,
right.
Alzheimer's with its kind of degenerative kind of attributes to it. It must be. I can only imagine how difficult that must be.
Yeah. And she died 2 months before our third child was born. So my wife was like deep into the pregnancy, and we had to travel to Massachusetts to go to her funeral. And, so that was rough on her. And we had two kids, one was 4 at the time, one was 2. So our kids were young and very close together. And this third one was coming. So they were what we call stair step children, where they're about 2 years apart from each other. And then my dad wasn't doing well. My the woman who was caretaking for my mother and father stole my mother's death benefit and left the country,
Jesus Christ.
which was $200,000 that she stole. And that messed things up. And then my dad took even more ill and stopped being able to walk properly. So I ended up moving him to our house down here in Kentucky so that we could take care of him. I sold his house and built him a handicap, apartment off the side of our house so that he could have his own space and we could take care of him. And he lived with us for a couple of years and progressively got worse and worse and worse. And in 2018, my wife's stepfather, who she was very close with, passed away of cancer. And then her brother-in-law passed away, due to some circumstances, with PTSD. He was in the military. So there was a whole bunch of stuff that just started happening and snowballing all at once. And then, I started to get really depressed in 2019. So towards the end, Rachel, who is my wife, she was just like, I see it. You need to do music. You need to like start playing piano again. Like that. I remember how you were when you played, and I've seen you when you found a piano and you just played randomly for 10 minutes. Your whole demeanor changes, So she says, you never buy anything for yourself. You always buy stuff for me. You always buy stuff for the kids, but you don't, you take care of us first. Why don't you just do something for you? And I think that you got that bonus that you just got. So let's take that money and let's invest it in a keyboard. So I bought a Yamaha Genos workstation, which is one of the nicest keyboards out there. And I just
I'm not entirely familiar with that. I learned on Yamaha, and then I progressed to Korg, and I have a Triton Lee 88, which is probably bordering on the decades old now, but I just love it. I absolutely love it. But I'll look that up.
The Genos is basically a total workstation. Like you can do everything on it. It creates MIDI files. So if I write something on it, I can plug in a flash drive, grab the MIDI files, plug it into a computer, and drop it right into a DAW.
Yeah.
Right. So I can do everything on that keyboard that I want to do. So I just started using that as, playing, and then I would just randomly hit record buttons and I would just start creating. And that's how I started writing the first songs that ended up being on this Nightfall album. And at first I was just doing it for fun as a hobby, just to get my mental state back, and it started helping. And then I created songs like Farewell and Starfall to help deal with my emotions with my mom, and Starfall was written like right as 2020 was starting, and with COVID hitting, and I was scared to death that one of these world powers, these leaders that we all had, was going to get a little itchy and push a button and destroy the world. So that's why Starfall ended up happening. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I started taking real events and the emotions that I was having and putting them into music.
I think just rolling back a little bit, with all of the incidences of loss that you've had to deal with, as well as kind of putting aside a passion of yours, and at the same time of supporting a family with an extension of the family along the way at quite a critical point, and looking after your mother and your father, and all this is to come out of it the way that you have, and to endure that that level of frequency and that level of trauma could crush someone.
Yes.
And huge credit to your wife for kind of spotting the pianist, the composer in you, and that demeanor. Because a lot of people don't see that. A lot of people see you playing with big boys' toys. Oh, it's a vanity like hobby, akin to like playing the Xbox or something. But she didn't see it that way. And then further credit to you for putting all of the content, well, not all the content, but you referencing the content in your compositions, which again is a testament to your character, your journey, and it just underlines the point that you are indeed an innate composer. Because I think that's that's something that composers do. They survive the vicissitudes of life in order to put it down into their passion, and that's how we can take on all of this stuff that happens to us. So great.
I do believe that everything happens for a reason, and I do believe that we do have kind of a path of fate that we follow. And I've been thinking about it, and if I had tried to continue going and make this type of music back 10 years ago, I would have needed label backing. I would have needed so much extra stuff to be able to make this happen. But now that it's happening now, with all the accessibility to things, now was the perfect time. And I'm older, so I'm more mature in the way that I write, the way that I compose. I've seen a lot more, and because of that life experience translates very well from my emotions and my mind to the music and to the lyrics on the page. And I think that's why she was, I feel like some force had her do that to me to get me into perspective, but get me into that focus. So now I come back to it later, and she was also the one who recognized that I needed to do it again, right? So it kind of came full circle. And and I still didn't really have a direction as of 2020. It was only until the passing of my father, it took that for me to finally have that moment of clarity. And let me share that, because this is my dad's hat. I wore it specifically today because I knew we might talk about this. So my dad was a huge Boston Red Sox fan. He was born and raised in Massachusetts. So Patriots for football, Boston Red Sox for baseball, Celtics for basketball. Like those were all of his teams. And I have all of his hats, and I wear them whenever I'm missing him. Yeah. And these last few days, has been some of those days where I've been missing him because the album's coming out and I wish I could share it with him, and I can't. He's not here, But I know he's watching, but it's not the same as having him right next to me. You know what I mean? Anyway, he got really sick, in 2021, very beginning of 2021, and he was in the hospital, and the docs were saying it didn't look good. And we finally decided that we were going to bring him home and put him on hospice. And then he had a kind of cataclysmic event at the hospital and almost died right there inside the hospital. And the doc was like, we can either let him go or I can pump him full of antibiotics so he can come home. And I had to make that decision. And I knew he wouldn't want to die in the hospital. So I told him, pump him full. Let's bring him home. I want him to die here. That's what needs to happen. So I set it up so that we could have a call with all of his brothers and sisters who were still alive at the time. And they were all able to say goodbye. And watching that happen, I wrote a song, while he was in hospice and coherent. I went downstairs and I just let the juices flow. And I wrote a song called "Not Ready to Let You Go."
Mm-hmm.
And it's very different than anything that you'll have heard on the Nightfall album. It's piano with acoustic guitar based piece of music, and we are going to be doing it. I've enlisted some help, and it's the next song on the docket. Will be released as a single. Adrian Jouadou is going to be singing.
Hey, good. Mm-hmm.
He's going to be singing this song for me. I've been waiting for ages to find the right voice for this, which is the reason why it's never been done. And then when Adrian came aboard to do Remember My Name and I heard his voice for the first time, it was an instant connection and I knew he was the person to sing it.
Oh man, that's awesome. I saw the post saying you were looking for a vocalist, and
yeah,
went away and did something. And by the time, and then I saw it again and saw that Adrian had replied, and I seconded that straight away. The second I saw it, he's a fantastic guy.
Oh yeah, we've become fast friends. He is such a good human being, and I absolutely love him to death. I really do. I really do. He's been such a good friend to me since we met a couple months back and stuff. So I've got nothing but positive things, and I will work with him on anything he asks me to. Absolutely.
Back you up, 110%. I met him through featuring, I think, his song on one of the first or the second episode of a kind of almost like a radio show playthrough type podcast thing I could just afford to do. I was fresh out of prison for a fraud sentence related to cocaine and putting my life back together. And I knew that I wanted to start helping musicians so that they didn't make the same fuck ups that I did.
Yeah.
And then so they didn't have, and also so they had something to soften the, internal narrative that, we can have about ourselves is deeply negative. And I just started with an iPhone cable and kind of embedding MP3s, doing a bit of talking, and then that was it. It was audio only, and I featured his track. And I got in contact with him because it was just so amazing. And literally, he pushed me all the way. He supported my vocal kind of stuff because I was just instrumental before. He supported the podcast, the label, and anything else that I've ever had going on or thought about. Is one of those people that can really motivate you, and it comes from a place of love and understanding. And so Adrian, if you're watching this, you're an awesome guy, but we both say it too. So it's really cool that we've now got this kind of freeway
full circle. Yeah. I love it.
There's not enough us in the world,
You're right. Yeah, you're right. So that's the future of everything. But going back, to what happened. So I wrote that song and I actually finished it. I didn't have recording means at that point in time. I was still kind of new to coming back to music still. And I just grabbed my phone and I let my piano play everything. And I sang the lyrics and stuff like that I wrote for it. And I brought it upstairs. And this was about 3 days before he died. And I played it for him. And we both cried, because he knew he was dying. The doctors had told him. My cousin had come down and she was a hospice nurse. And her husband is my blood cousin. He was there to try and soften the blow and all that stuff too, because it's not an easy thing to tell someone they're going to die. And with that, he after he composed himself, he looked at me and he told me that he was sorry, that he didn't support all of the musical stuff that I did as a kid, and is like he was there for some of it, but he always believed that it was just a fantasy dream, you know, to become a professional musician because of how hard the industry was. He's always told me that I should follow in his footsteps, do, you know, sports, do this, you know, he owned a survey company and stuff like that. So throughout my life, he never backed me on the music stuff, right? But at this moment, after hearing that song, all of it changed. And he told me that he was sorry for not being there. And when I was needed.
This is tough. I can see this is tough for you, and it's tough for me as well. So
Yeah. So, but then what the next few phrases that he iterated is the reason why I got back into music. It's the reason why this album is called Destiny Calling. So he told me that I have a calling to do this, and that he feels now that this was my destiny all along. And then he told me the last thing he told me was that he loved me, but the sentence right before that was, "Go follow your dreams, son." He told me that, and this was shortly thereafter. He slipped into the coma, and you know, he only woke up a couple more times after that, and it was for very, very brief moments. And the worst part of this is that, like, one of the reasons why he lasted so long is he told me he wanted to make it to his birthday because he was so close to his 78th birthday at the time. And they gave him 3 days. His birthday was 8 days away, and they gave him 3 days to live. Son of a bitch made it 8 days. He woke up. Just I tried waking him up just past midnight on his birthday, and he was coherent for 10 seconds. And he looked at me, he smiled. I said happy birthday to him, and he said I love you. And then he slipped back into the coma, and my wife relieved me early in the morning to go to sleep. And I think he was waiting for that because I had been sitting vigil with him for days. And when I went upstairs to finally get some sleep, he passed with my wife watching over him. And that was hard. But, you know, he was my rock and my Superman. Mm-hmm. But those words stuck with me. And he said, this was my destiny. This was my calling. And I put those together and I created that song. And that's what that song means. That song means that we have, as musicians, a calling to share our gift, that we can be powerful, we can be healing through music. And that song is a call to anyone that has been called to do anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be music, right? To be a teacher, whatever it is that you are called to do, step up and do it. Screw what anyone tells you if you can and can't do it. Because no matter what, if you work hard enough, you can do anything. And that's what my dad taught me. And that's why Destiny Calling. That's why the album is named that. That's why that song is written the way that it is. That's why it's an ensemble piece and not just for one vocalist, is because it shows that when people come together, you can create some amazing beauty.
Wow. That really puts a ton of flesh on the project. And I think there's a story that everyone can relate to or take something from. It's interesting. I've listened to you to discuss your project, and the more you discuss it, the more I can sort of sense a laser focus, and that clearly comes from that experience that you've gone through with your father and his drive, even at the very end, to say, you know, go forward, do this. It's almost like that could have been part of the answer you were waiting for all along.
Right.
And I think, you know, the previous advice and the not so much nurturing the musicianship, I think the generation above us, you know, comes from the generation that's come out of the war, and they've seen, you know, people rebuilding lives and,
yeah.
and doing, and not so much about art. We live in a society now where there's a job that you can make out of most things. And I think that was just an era thing, and of course a parental need for protection. So don't feel the loss of support, back in the earlier days in your youth when you started out. But it's
Right.
beautiful that he saw that at the end. And yeah, this is probably one of the most touching podcast episodes ever. And I didn't bring you on here to traumatize you.
No, listen, these are all the things that, because the music was created in this fashion, the album was created from a place of love. And I knew this. I didn't realize that it would translate so well, but so many people that have listened to it have stated that exact thing to me, that you can tell that this album was made from love. And especially when you listen to it from start to finish, especially when you listen to Farewell, the outro track before the bonus track of Invincible, because that one's about my mother, that one's about dealing with grief as well. And this album is just an emotional ride, everything from fantasy to heart pounding chants, to fast paced music, to beautiful music, to it's got everything, musical influences, 80s influences. Like, I put everything that I grew up with into this, and I created that style because of all of those experiences rolled into one. And the goal of Nightfall is to help people through music. That's the reason. The night code, the honor, the chivalry, the way that we're supposed to be as a society that we've gotten away from, that we need to come back to help people, to care about people. These are all of the messages that I'm trying to bring with this project. It's not just for me. I share this with everyone who wants to be part of it.
Yes, there's a lot of sentiment. It's a very kind of cohesive and complex combination of not just the musical attributes, but personal attributes. You've got your ethics, you've got your kind of desires, you've got your philosophy, you've got all of your experiences and struggles, all combined to put in this one output or future outputs. But when listening to it, all of this complexity translates so simply, if you understand what I mean. It's so honest, it's so authentic, it's so uncluttered. Why? Because it is innately human by design, and in its beauty, and that's where I think you've got something very special. I'm noticing the timer is going to run out on the free version, so I think this might be a good point to pause, let video one save, and then if you're willing, I think we need to continue and do another session. So a comfort break, if you will. Okay, so what you saw there was a bit of an interlude from the reaction video I did, link below. In part two, as if I haven't put this poor gentleman through enough, we're going to just go a shade darker. I'd like to talk to you about the track Farewell. Let me about that.
All right, so my mother, when she passed in 2017 from Alzheimer's, it was a tough situation because at the time I was living in Kentucky area and she was in Massachusetts, and that's about 1,500 miles from each other. So when she fell ill, it happened quick. She started to display the signs, and within under 2 years, she went from short term to completely unable to talk and function, right? So One day she's able to use the phone to talk to me and call me, and the next day she had forgotten how. And then after that, and this was like right around Christmas time, which is for my job like the busiest time. So there was no vacation, there was nothing that I could take to get out of there. And my dad said, "It's okay, you know, like let's try after." Well, the earliest I was able to get out there with my company's vacation time was March of 2017, and by the time I made it, she was gone. She was just a shell. There was no recognition in her eyes. There was nothing. And for years, I felt like I left her. You know, I wasn't there. You know, I wasn't there. She'd always been there for me. I wasn't there when it counted. And that riddled me with an awful guilt because my mother always had my back whenever something was needed. And when it came down to that situation where she needed me, I wasn't there for her. And that I know that, and all the people that know her, she's like, they're like, you know, I know she doesn't think that. And I'm like, I get that. But it doesn't change the fact of the matter that it happened, you know? So I knew I had to do something. And one of the first songs that I wrote after kind of coming back and relearning how to, like, you know, dusting off the piano chops and stuff like that was Farewell. And initially it was just a piano ballad. That's how it started off. And then all of a sudden I just got angry with myself. Like I was revisiting all those emotions and I got mad at myself again. And then I felt the guilty, the denial, that so many emotions with grief really is. Anyway, I ended up writing this big instrumental piece, and then I finished the song by bringing it back down to this, like, you know, outro that was back to the chorus, that was back to the piano ballad and stuff like that. And when it was done, I realized what I had written was an emotional song journey of the stages of grief. It clicked in my head, and I was like, well, shit, I did this. And I was like, you can hear it. Like if you listen to the song from start to beginning, the beginning of that song is a lament. It is depression. Okay. Then as it starts to flow through the chorus and all that stuff, you know, the second verse where it starts talking about how, you know, I'm seeing her places, right? There's the denial that she's actually gone. And then when it goes into, you know, Pete Rockcliffe's part where he's doing the narration over the orchestral, when that orchestral music starts, that's the beginning of going into anger. And then when the orchestral really takes off, where the heavy drums hit, that is absolutely all anger. And then where like the guitars, where Jessica's you know, singing her little like arias and stuff like that, you know, in there. And then there's the guitar solos. Now we've reached the bargaining stage of grief. And then when it finally goes back to Pete's narration in the final outro, we finally have that acceptance part. So it literally takes the listener through the 5 stages of grief and is my tribute. The lyrics are very much my tribute in my way of dealing and finding some form of catharsis in what happened to help deal with those heavy emotions that have been burdening me since 2017. Releasing that song was a massive weight off of my shoulders. I finally felt like I did something to make her proud of me, and you know, made up for the stuff that I, you know, didn't do, that I felt like I should have done. You know, and then Sergio and Jessica, because they're very good with videographies and stuff like that, they helped me with this video. And I told them that I wanted it to be raw and real. And I told them that I wanted to depict everything that I had been through, the stuff that me and my mom had gone through together, like my attempted suicide when I was 15. There was a lot of bullying going on when I was younger. And it got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. And, you know, this is what happened with my mother, because my mother is an older group, you know, older age group, and suicide. She was devout Catholic too, so suicide is just not something you talk about. And I finally got to the point where I told her that I wanted to kill myself, and she had that Catholic mindset. You know, she told me that I didn't have the guts. And at that moment in time, that was probably the worst thing that you could say to somebody that was at that stage. And you know, she kept a very healthy pharmacy in the house. She was that old school. So if she had one bottle of NyQuil, there was two backups just in case we ran out. So there was like three of everything. So if there was one package of Sudafed, there was three. My dad was on pain medication, so he had like 90-day supplies of hydrocodone, gabapentin, all kinds of crazy drugs that, you know, are now in the United States listed as like narcotics, and you have to have special prescriptions for, right? I took everything. I went into that closet. I took every pill that was in there. I drank every medicinal liquid that was in the closet. I put so much stuff into my body, I shouldn't be talking to you right now. And the part where they actually defib the character in the video, that actually did happen. That's biographical. So when my parents, I did all of that, and then I went to sleep. I thought that I would just pass in my sleep. I figured that's what would happen, and that's far from it. I woke up screaming with pain. My head felt like someone was driving a spike through it. I felt like my body was being ripped apart because I was dying, as I was actively dying at that moment. I started projectile vomiting, and my mom heard the ruckus. She got out of bed. She ran down the hallway to see what was going, and then she saw what was happening. It was like, it probably looked like The Exorcist to her, you know. And she looked, and she told me that when she knew what I had done, she saw all the pills and the vomit. I was upchucking a lot of them, and she called my dad, and they picked me up and rushed me to the car and started driving me to the hospital. And somewhere between leaving the house and going to the hospital, I actually did die. So when I got to the hospital, I had no heartbeat. They had to paddle me back to life. And luckily I came back. There's more to that story, but that'll be left for another time.
Wow. Well, it's very fortunate that you are here and you survived that. And I think when we hit those rock bottoms, wherever they fall in our lifetime or our age, I like to think that it creates, it's almost like you can see life all over again, and you know its value after, and it makes our shoulders broader and sharpens our purpose. I'd like to think that. I like to.
No, it's you're not wrong. You're not wrong, because going through that was, I mean, because the fallout of it was crazy. You know, I had to basically be in a mental hospital for like a month under observation. Like, there was, when they finally got me back, they had to pump my stomach, but then I also had to drink this liquid called charcoal, and that was an experience in itself. That was awful. I remember it was just awful. And then of course I had to see counselors, and they put me on Zoloft and all kinds of, like, you know, things to try and medicate me so that I wouldn't feel like I needed to do that again. You know what I mean? So, which made me feel worse. You know, the antidepressants and stuff like that made me worse. And it got to the point where I finally got off of those myself. I was like, nope, I'm done. As soon as I turned 18, I pulled myself off, and I went through withdrawals, and it was awful. That was awful too. But I knew that this is what I wanted to do, that I could beat this. And yes, it's a struggle every single day, but I used, and here's the full circle moment, I used music. I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I composed, and I did all of these things to keep my mind, to channel all of the darkness into light. And that's how I coped with everything. And it wasn't just that too. It was video games. It was, I wrote stories, you know, I played D&D. I did all of these creative things that would keep my mind sharp.
I think you're very on the ball there with creativity, or being a way, a pathway out of pain. I totally am behind that. I'm going to say you're a braver man than I. And I don't want to get too much into my stories, although I do actually wish to share them with you, but maybe for another time, as this is kind of your podcast episode. I used composing as a way out of cocaine addiction. That took 5 years of my life and added a prison sentence on it, which took a further kind of 15 and a half months of being inside, and then another further 15 and a half months of scrutiny on the other side of the gate.
Right.
And on the day of my release of the prison, you can imagine how happy someone might be under those circumstances, to finally see the outside.
Right.
And I didn't know it until months later, but it was on that day I lost my brother. He died.
Oh God.
I found out through a Google search. And he survived. I survived my demons, but it turned out he didn't survive his. And I later learned that he had the same diagnosed personality disorder, or borderline personality disorder. He had the same issues with cocaine. He had the same experiences with childhood abuse of every variety, which I had fully believed as his older brother and as the eldest brother, that I deliberately put myself in the path of those so that it didn't happen to my younger siblings. And long story short, my family disappeared 20 years ago when I started to kind of be an older teenager and talk, to people that they didn't want me talking to. So I'd always believed that one day my younger siblings would come around and that they were safe and old enough, and I'd put myself in front of all unspeakable stuff, and so that they didn't have to. And then to learn that on the day I'm celebrating coming out of custody for stupid, unnecessary shit, and kind of self-punishment and all this kind of stuff, that he had lived his last days. And it was worse than that. It's worse than that because once he was obviously of no use to my family, he got kind of shunned out, which is what happened to me when I got to a certain age. And that's when he took up his addictions and stuff. And there's a phenomena here in the UK called cuckooing. It might be a relevant term in the US, but it's where drug dealers take over the premises of someone that they're supplying and basically use it as a base camp for their operation. And the reward for this is access to drugs, but it gets violent,
Right.
It gets brutal, and he suffered multiple injuries. And it's unclear to this day whether or not there was foul play. It's an accidental overdose, whether it's an accidental overdose plus the beating, or a mixture of all the combinations.
Yep. We know that we've experienced that with my wife's brother-in-law. That's very similar, almost identical, unfortunately.
And my dad is. We have a thing called the coroner here, where basically they kind of have a public case about it. And my father, the narcissist that he is, had managed to disrupt the proceedings so much that they called a halt to them, and they will never go. So I will never find out the answer. And I have sat here and I have gone, it should have been me. He's left 4 children behind. My acts as a younger man, and as a cocaine addict, I've been far worse than anything that he's ever tripped up on. And I've done all of that self-punishment. I should have, I should have done this. I should have done that. I felt, and I know what you mean when you say that people turn to you and say, well, look at it logically, look at this. Yeah, I understand all of that, but it doesn't
compute.
It doesn't compute. It doesn't then. And you're a braver man than I because you've written about it. And I'm not ready to touch that yet.
No, but someday you will be, because that's the thing. The creativity aspect of the composer and just the musician in general. When you're ready, you put it into words, because that's kind of the finality of it too. Because when you finally put it out there like that, you're accepting that fate. You're accepting what's happened, and you're putting it to bed. You've dealt with it. That's what I've used the music to do, is to finally deal with those situations. And now it makes it easier, right? And I won't say it's gone. You know, there's going to be days. There's going to be days where all the emotions come flooding back, and it's going to be tough. But you always got to think about all the other things that you've got going for you. You know, you're still here on the other side, right? That's important, because right now you're beating it. You're strong too, because you're here, right? And these are the things that I teach my children too. You know, I try to give them all this, and in ways that they can understand at their ages right now. And I'm sure as they get older, they'll understand with greater detail, you know, the things that I've been through. And I'm hoping that they will not fall to the same pitfalls that I've fallen to. My job as a parent is to try and make sure that my children don't feel the things that I have felt. I don't want them to,
Or
because
at the very least have an idea, or have a kind of almost a practiced kind of resilience and
yes,
and core of self faith that
right.
asks something, because things are undoubtedly going to
Emotional, yeah, I call it emotional intelligence.
yeah.
Like I try to teach them emotional intelligence. So that's the key, and to understanding people that have been through trauma. You know, my wife has been through trauma, lots of it, you know, with her family throughout the years too. So like, there's so many different faces that trauma can come at. I almost look at it as like they're demons. You know what I mean? And that, again, that also tracks with the night, you know, genre, the way that I portrayed Nightfall, is because we are fighting demons, we are fighting the horde, we are fighting, you know, some kind of darkness, and we are the light.
Yeah, I mean, there is darkness all around us, and as well within us, and we have to get to know that. And a lot of my music lyrically kind of centers around that, you know, the narratives, and various different bits. And yeah, I'm just so fortunate that I can expurge a lot of this into the musical work, that not just composing, but statements like this. I mean, your father in the real world, you have children, but even as composers, as musicians, regardless of how successful we are, because there's always going to be a next generation of bedroom musicians, you know, in my case, you know, as much as there's going to be a next generation of superstars, but we're all kind of fathers to the generations that are coming up. What we're doing here, I would like to think, has some value. You know, life can be shit, life can be fucking tough, but you know, if you've got something inside of you, like a project you can work with, you're a musician or an artist or a painter, or even if you're a carpenter or something, knuckle down and invest in that, because it's that will see you through.
Yeah. Now there's a lyric in the song Destiny Calling in the second chorus, where it says, "We are the shield of true heart and might."
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah.
So on to the Nights and Matters.
All right.
You've worked with lots of people. You mentioned Pete Rawcliffe. There's a video that he's done. I can't remember the exact name of the song, but it was the Love Anniverse track. It will come to me. His voice has moved me to tears, and it is no surprise that I'm seeing him work with just a litany of artists, and watching his career sort of go stratospheric. So how did you kind of get to meet all of these people? And because you sent me was huge.
Let's go through the story. All right. So I met Patrick first, Patrick Goebel. He was the first guitarist on the album. He did Waiting for You, was the very first track that we did.
Oh.
So that was because I started taking production lessons with him, because I had no idea what I was doing with the DAW. at the time. So he started showing me the basics of Pro Tools. He also used, and he used Logic, and he convinced me to get a Mac and start using Logic, just like he was using with all the VSTs and stuff, to be able to do what I was wanting to do. So he started teaching me all these things, and then he liked the demo so much, and he said, hey, if you need a guitarist, and he's a virtuoso on a guitar. So we connected on that. He started coming over to my house, and we started, working in the studio and getting things down for Waiting for You. And then we had that. I didn't know what I was going to do for a singer at the time, because I still hadn't talked with Jessica yet at this point. And then I went on Fiverr and did a massive search, probably listened to over 200 vocalists on Fiverr, and then found Dee right towards the end. She was awesome. Like, her voice was different. That's what drew me to her, is that she had a much deeper tone than most women would have, but she could still get up there with power. And get outside of that comfort zone. So she's just fantastic. So, and I was like, for this tribute to the 80s, she's got the voice that I want for this. So, that song was meant to be very much, not so much symphonic. It was meant to be a tribute of the 80s with a little bit of symphonic element peppered into it. I wanted the solos to be very reminiscent of, something like Eddie Van Halen would do, because right now is the song that kind of inspired the stylistic choices that I have in Waiting for You. So we did that, and then I went and did our power metal song, The Musketeer, which was, again, with Dee, and that fast-paced vocal that she does and stuff. And I wanted that. I almost wanted her to sing that speed vocal like you would hear a rapper do speed rapping. Right. That was kind of the idea behind it. But that song is also a history lesson. I wrote that song because I also wanted to teach my kids about the story of the Three Musketeers. So there was reasons behind doing that, which is fun. And then Dee, one more time, graced us with her vocals on the cover of Invincible, which that song is what launched me into being able to talk with a whole bunch of other people. So that song came out. I had started talking to Jessica again, and she was pretty impressed with what I was putting together. And she's like, hey, if you need any help with anything, you know that I'm here for you, because we've been friends for years and just hadn't, we'd stopped talking to each other for almost a decade. But talking to her again was just like reopening the door. It was like no time had passed whatsoever. And it was great to just be able to chat with her about music and life and geek stuff, costumes. Like, it was just cool, because we had left that behind for years. She was married now, I was married now, I had a family, she's been doing the Anaria thing. Like, we have matured, we've grown up from the old ethos days. So it was cool to reconnect. I sent her my demo folder, and without realizing it, she chose the two songs that I actually wrote with her in mind initially. She chose Starfall first, and that was the first one that I wrote, but I completely wrote that with her voice in mind. And then she was only going to do one initially, but she loved Farewell so much. She was like, if I could pick another one. And I was like, go ahead, pick another one. She was like, Farewell. And she chose those two, which was crazy, because those were originally written with her in mind. So that's how she came on board. Charlene and Gideon Emerlut of Woods of Wonders, they reposted. I was in the Power Symphonic group, and I posted, the Invincible cover, and they were like, "This is awesome." And Charlene friended me and Gideon friended me on Facebook and stuff. And Charlene, reposted the song on there. Pete saw that, commented on it, how much he loves Pat Benatar. Yeah. And I went down the rabbit hole and started finding some of his stuff. And I was like, oh my God, a male sopranist? Are you kidding me right now?
The Arcane Muse, the track came to me. Yeah.
Yeah, the Arcane Muse. And then, his stuff, what was it, Valcata, that did the Archangel song with him? Oh my God, that song's so good. No, but like, for real, I heard the Crown Solace stuff. Like, I started hearing the things that he was doing, and I was like, he is a male sopranist that sounds like Taria, but is a male I couldn't get over the fact that he was a guy at first, right? And so I started just talking with him at first. I didn't invite him to the project right away, but I knew that that was, as soon as I heard him, I knew that I had to find a way to get Pete Rockcliffe to sing on this album. It had to happen. And the song that I knew I wanted him on initially was The Hero Walks Alone, because there's growls in that song, there's low baritone in that song. How cool would it be to have a guy singing the soprano part that I wrote. That would shock people. They listen to that song and be like, "Oh, she's a good singer." Nope, not a she. So the shock value, that I wanted that shock value for people, to realize that this is a guy singing this and how good he is. And my wife loves his voice. And yeah, he's just, once I got to know him, like my friendship with him.
He's another great guy as well.
Oh,
I don't talk to him enough. I have interviewed him. We kind of touch base very sporadically. I know he's also a hugely busy person. So
yes, he's a beautiful, beautiful human being. Like he has been. I've had some tough moments this last year. These last 6 months, finding out about some things that I'm going to have, like this big surgery that's going to be coming up in a couple of weeks. I haven't even posted on Nightfall's page to even let people know this is happening yet. But this is a pretty major surgery. But he's been behind the scenes. He's always checking in with me. Hey, mate, how you doing? You okay? How you feeling about this? Right, it's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be worried about what's happening. Like so motivational and just like he's there for me. Like even when he doesn't need to be. So he's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. And I've had so many good conversations with him. And he's such a talent, such a powerhouse of a talent. And then through him, it started a chain, right? So I got Pete to join, and then I was mentioning to him that I've got these other songs that I still don't know who I want. He's like, let me put you in touch with my friend Stephanie Keogh.
yeah.
And I was like, okay. And then I started talking with Stephanie. I listened to her stuff, and she could do almost anything.
Aware I mispronounced the surname. So.
Huh?
I've heard it. I've seen the name Keough. I kind of, if you remember the reaction video, I was like, I'm not sure on this surname, but okay, now I know. It's thank you.
Yep. No, you're good. So I'm not even 100% sure if that's right, but that's how I hear it in my head. So that's where I'm going with.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. But no, she's fantastic. She is like she says that she is the jack of all trades vocalist. That's how she defines herself, and she's not wrong. She can sing low, she can sing high, she can growl, she can do pretty. I mean, she can do theater, she can act, she can do everything. And she is absolutely fantastic. So she went through my demo list, and she immediately gravitated towards War Cries. At the time, War Cries was I had the lyrics and the melody for the choruses, but I still hadn't had the verses and all the lyrics completed. And she's like, "Do you have full lyrics for this yet?" And I was like, "Actually, no, I don't have it for the verses. I just have it for the choruses." And I was like, "If you listen to it and something hits you, let me know." And like a week later, she comes back at me with a full song, and I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" So yeah, she did the lyrics and like some of the melody for the lead parts of for War Cries, which was absolutely fantastic. And that song came out so good. It's going to be a fan favorite. I know it's going to be a fan favorite, but it came out so good. And then Pete mentioned to me that he's known Stephanie for years, but never actually been able to sing with her. Never happened. So I was like, well, why don't we put you two together for Children of Time and make this happen? And so that's what we did. They sang that song together. And then, of course, Jessica ended up doing more stuff on the album as well. So she ended up singing on Raise Your Fist. She ended up singing on Remember My Name. And she also helped write Raise Your Fist with her husband, Sergio. They helped with like lyrics and melody for that song as well. So that was kind of a co-write between all three of us. And then for Raise Your Fist, we got Susie Scarlett. She's out of Mexico, who has a very, very much Nora Luhimo style to her vocal. And that's what I was going for in that song when I wrote it. I wanted, if I could have gotten Nora to sing that, like if I can even remix the song at some point in time with getting Nora to sing on it too. Yeah, let's do that. But no, there really wasn't a way to get her because she's, huge and she's busy and she's multiple projects right now. Right. So someone mentioned, Charlene mentioned to me, maybe tried Knit Vallow, and I did. But she was also busy with After Affinity and Dream Tale and stuff like that. And then Charlene was like, well, it's a long shot, but maybe we can get a hold of Susie. She did stuff for our album. So she put me in touch with Susie, and boom, Susie ended up being the one that sings on Raise Your Fist with Jessica. And originally it was going to be Susie 100%. And then Jessica, the way that it seemed empty, like because of it being kind of like a protest song in a way, I needed more than one vocal in that to flesh that out and make it sound as big as it needed to be. So I added Jessica to it, and that trade-off that they do ended up working brilliantly. And that was actually an idea that was suggested to me initially by Sergio, and I thought about it, and I was just like, you know what, you're right. This would be fantastic. So got to give him kudos that was initially his idea.
You confirmed one thing in my mind, because to keep the purity of the reaction, I just sort of 20 seconds, like point and click, anywhere in the waveform until I find something that grabs me, and I go, okay, that one, that I'll do a reaction to that one, and do reaction to that one. But afterwards, I've had an opportunity to listen to the album in its fullest, and I did listen again with a composer's ear. It was almost as for like, yeah. So this isn't a case of you've written some music and you've kind of, gone around trying to find someone to sing on it. It's almost, I felt the elective sort of as if the vocal, the instrumentation, the timbre of everything was considered.
Yes, everything is deliberate and by design. I don't believe in half-assing anything and just doing something for the sake of doing it. Everything was very poignant and in the way that I wanted it to be. Without question, I wanted it to be like that. So which is the reason why it took me forever to find the right vocalist for Remember My Name, because I wanted somebody that could truly embody that mindset of Achilles, because Achilles was tough. So when we did the audition process, when Adrian gave me his audition, I pictured in my head the part at a tenor range. But then he did that with his lower register and gave me that vocal. And I was like, holy crap, I was missing that. I didn't even think of this. So I was like, okay, yes, all kinds of yes, because his voice complements what Jessica does as the narrator in that song so well. And he gave me such a beautiful take with that audition. And I was like, yep, you're the dude that's going to be doing this one. Mm-hmm. And nothing against any of the people who audition. I had so many great auditioners like Luigi and Gideon and Rodrigo, all power metal powerhouses. And I've even asked them, and hopefully we'll be able to have this content sometime in the next year, but I've asked them to do alternate versions of that song because I want people to hear how amazing they did with the power metal version of it too. So there'll probably be an alternate version somewhere of that song down the line. And then Destiny Calling brings everybody together, which was, again, by design. I wanted, the majority of vocalists. I didn't, unfortunately, because of time constraints, I didn't have time to include Susie in that. And then Dee, unfortunately, due to her busy schedule, she didn't have time to sing on that. But I got almost everybody to do that one, and it came out so good. And then again, Pete and Stephanie get to sing a second time on that one in the second chorus, and I actually sang with Jessica on that one that was for the first time in like 13 years that she and I have, maybe even 15 years that she and I have actually sung together. So that was kind of a full circle moment too. And then Hero Walks Alone added Marcos Panade in there for growls, mm-hmm. And he was suggested to me by Stephanie. So again, keep going down the line here. And I listened to his stuff and I was like, why is he not known? Because he's awesome. And I was like, okay, cool. Let's see if Marcos will do it. And Marcos was like, yeah, let's do it. And then as I never planned on writing more growl vocals, it was only going to be for that song. But then I kept hearing a growl at the end of Children of Time. And then I started hearing growls in the middle of Raise Your Fist. Yeah. So I kept messaging him. I was like, hey, I know you're already done with you, but can you do this? Can you do this? And Marco was like, yeah, man, I got you. Yeah, man, I got you. He even did some some of the choir vocals for War Cries, and he did a take for Destiny Calling as well. So like he just kept doing and doing and doing, and it just, everything he did just kept coming out great. Guitarist wise, I ended up meeting a guy named George Acker through, I'd done a podcast, and he saw it and was just like, and he heard the music and he was just like, this guy, I have to reach out to him. There's just something about Keith. I feel like I'm supposed to work with him and meet him.
There is something about you for sure. Yeah.
That's what he told me. Well, I appreciate that. But he reached out and I immediately responded back. And then we ended up, he's like, would you mind giving me, because I'm trying to do the same thing that you're doing. I'm trying to write a symphonic metal album, but you're so much farther ahead of me. Do you have some time to talk about what you're doing? I'd love to hear from you. And I was like, sure, let's set it up. And we ended up having a 6-hour conversation.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we went over everything and we became fast friends. And then I was like, hey, let's try this. I've listened to some of your stuff and you are a fantastic guitarist. Patrick has done a lot of stuff on the album, but let's throw you into the mix. Why don't you try doing Children of Time? He gave me Children of Time, and I was like, holy crap. Patrick ended up hurting his hand and couldn't do Remember My Name. So I was like, hey, let's do Remember My Name together. And then again, Patrick was still hurt. So we ended up doing Raise Your Fist with him as well. And then I asked him to put a solo in the end of Farewell. And that's how George came in. And then Sergio was the producer of the album. And, his wife, Jessica, is singing on a lot of the songs. And I was just like, hey, man, Destiny Calling, you have a really cool guitar tone and like your really cool style to what you do. Let's change it up. You do guitars for Destiny Calling. And he was like, all right, let's do it. And so he's the guitarist that does the guitars and bass on Destiny Calling as well. So we had so many amazing people that came together to create this.
And what a project it is. I feel that we will probably have a number of episodes here talking about all sorts. But Destiny Calling official release dates?
Friday is the final release for physical is Friday. It's digital on Bandcamp, and then we're going to be releasing the remaining singles to streaming one at a time every couple of months. So this month was Hero Walks Alone. Then we're going to do War Cries in May. Remember My Name is July. September is going to be Children of Time. Early November is going to be Raise Your Fist, and then to cap it all off is going to be the big Destiny Calling at the end of the year in December.
Awesome. So very quickly, in closing, you're an inspirational gentleman. You've been through so much. You've commanded your journey with honor and integrity and passion and creativity. And I think there's a lot that people can draw from your music, from the way you conduct yourself, and perhaps even from this episode with us here today. I look very much forward to inviting you back.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate you having me come on. And again, I know this all kind of happened really, really fast. So just the efficiency and the way that you've kind of handled bringing me into your world as well, I truly, truly appreciate it.
Yeah, it's like appreciation's the same. I think we're going to get on like a house on fire. There's going to be more from the Face Ripper and the Nightfall camp in future. But
awesome.
Unfortunately, that's all for today. Links and stuff will be below to check out this music if you haven't heard it already. It's fantastic.